Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, recording on Halloween, but airing wherever you consume this. I'm, of course, dressed as someone on the verge of a nervous breakdown with a hideously debilitating caffeine and stress addiction, as is covering BC politics these days. Stressful times, spooky times, mostly for the BC government, which scared the bejesus out of the rest of us this week with the threat of a snap election. Just one of the topics we're going to get into, along with a new deal for the BCGEU, continued fallout from the Cowichan Nation title court ruling. To break it all down, we bring in the full pod squad this week. Jeff Ferrier, Allie Blades, and Jillian Oliver, thank you for being here. To start, let's all take a look at what Premier David Eby had to say about early election this week.
Our government is committed to the 10,000 jobs that this bill represents. We're going to deliver those for British Columbians, and I would stake our government on that. We have to be ready. The last thing I want is an election, and with that said, this bill is non-negotiable for me.
Okay, so the Premier saying his high-voltage transmission line from Prince George to Terrace, non-negotiable. Take it to the voters, bring it on. Jeff, what's he really saying here, or is that really what he's saying?
I don't know. I think British Columbians can feel the electricity of a snap election. We all want that. I don't think that this is about for the Premier calling an election. I think what he's trying to do is two things. One, he's trying to signal a seriousness and a commitment to an economic initiative that's going to bring electricity to the Northwest, power LNG and mines. This is central to his economic vision for the province and how he's going to dig himself out from the deficit and pay for things like labor deals. We'll talk about that later. And the second thing I think he's doing here is using this legislation, which is opposed by the BC Conservatives and opposed by One BC, as a hammer, a political hammer, something that he can use in northern and rural British Columbia to show that, to convey in his view that the NDP is on the side of voters and communities up there, the First Nations communities and business and industry there who all support this transmission line, something that he doesn't usually have the opportunity to do. The NDP has struggles in the north and the rural British Columbia, and this is the Premier's opportunity to push back.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense to me, Jillian, but at the same time, he's got a majority, right? He's got the same one-seat majority he had last October when the Premier emerged from the provincial election declaring a mandate to lead for 4 years. He can pass this bill. In fact, shortly after he made those comments, he passed it through second reading. He fended off an amendment in committee stage. I mean, he's got the votes. It's not like the government could fall here unless I'm misreading it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a little bit of grandstanding for the reasons Jeff said, maybe kind of daring the Greens a little bit. They're going into renegotiations for their agreement. But yeah, you're right. Technically, it would be very hard to orchestrate a lost vote. They've already demonstrated that they're willing to use the speaker to break ties if all of the other opposition members are against legislation. And, there is some precedent that the government can't fall by accident. They have such a slim majority, someone could be absent, but in those cases, probably the government still wouldn't fall. That being said, Premier kind of has the ability to go ask for an election anytime. Doug Ford did it 2 years early, even though he already had a much bigger majority. So I think, I don't think we're going to have an election tomorrow. I think it's not off the table. And, EB's trying to show some strength in that if there is an election, that it wouldn't be his fault.
Mm-hmm. Maybe reminding everyone that there could be one. Allie, we all sort of talk about it behind the scenes because the idea would be you capitalize on the chaos and the division inside the BC Conservatives and maybe a little bit with the Greens. As Jillian mentioned, they just elected a new leader. And then you vault into a supermajority maybe, depending on how the campaign goes. Do you think that plays any role in all this?
It 1000% does. Like, this is all the posturing that Jillian and Jeff were talking about. Like, fool me once here with, by David Eby standards, where he was criticized for not calling an early election last governing cycle. And so now there's the additional pressure that if he misses this window and for whatever reason the opposition decides that they're going to be a more effective opposition and they see this path for them to govern, then he's missed this critical window where he could very well have a supermajority. That on top of, there's an NDP convention coming up very soon where his leadership review is happening, where he has to signal that he is in a leader position and that he could be the only one that would take them into the next election. There's already political gossip and rumors about some others that may be a more effective premier right now in comparison to David Eby. So there's a lot of selfish reasons as to why he would want to go into an early election, but the political writing on the wall is that this would be a good time to take advantage of the turmoil on the other side. The other aspect that I think about a lot here is there's also a lot of rumors about a federal election, and how does that impact if we go into a both provincial and federal election year. It could be very interesting for us, but it also means that a lot of things don't get done.
Mm-hmm. Usually in the past when we talk about a federal election, it's like, well, BC, would have to send staff to party staff to the federal parties because they need it. But the federal government is in a minority, so we don't know if it'll even pass its budget or what's going to happen there. It's a big open question. Jeff, the convention issue, is there any role in that? The Premier saying this to bolster himself in a convention where we are all hearing, he may not get the strong leadership vote that he's hoping for.
I think the BC Conservatives are talking that a little bit because they're projecting. They're having some problems with their own leader and leadership and wishing that on the NDP. I think it's anytime you're a New Democrat leader and a premier and you've been through tough negotiations with the public sector union, when you're a little bit out of the comfort zone of traditional NDP and pushing major projects, when you're dealing with the fallout of the BC ferries, there's always going to be some conjecture and some questions about how that will affect a leadership review number. I think the Premier will get a strong support from the party membership at the convention. I think there may be some grumbling, as there usually is at NDP conventions, but I think the Premier will come out in a strong position, and this talk on North Coast Transmission Line is a good signal to, and I think an intentional signal to party members of the strength of his leadership.
Jillian, this is not the first time Eby has threatened an election. Remember on Bill 7, the cabinet power grab fast track bill, Bill 14, he's both times there said, you know what? You don't like what I'm doing? Let's go to an election. I'll take it to the voters. I'm sort of reconciling that continued reference with the guy who barely won by 22 votes, a one-seat majority, and promised right after to slow things down and bring voters along with him. Is it just like times have changed, or why does he keep saying this, do you think?
I think a couple of things. I think one, right now, he probably is rightly assuming that there's a lot of appetite for decisive leaders with strong conviction, and I think he's kind of using this as a way to portray that. And it's also just a way to keep the opposition in line, and I think that's why you're also hearing it at the federal level. I would be shocked if we go into another federal election, given the state of the various parties right now. But it's kind of, it's sort of just a way to kind of keep the opposition in line and sort of dare them and kind of tell them to pipe down and show voters that you're the one that's focused on kind of moving forward with the issues at hand. So yeah, I think it kind of comes down to all of that.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here. Allie, I'm going to come to you next on the next topic, but we have the BCGEU strike ending. Is it labor peace time for the province? We'll get into that topic coming up right after this.
Absolutely. We believe it's a fair deal. We would never have entered into a tentative agreement or recommend it to our members if we didn't believe that. We believe this hits all or most of the key priorities our members identified for us in this round of bargaining.
BCGEU President Paul Finch celebrating after basically getting government to offer a far better deal following his 8-week strike, double the contract length to 4 years, in some cases double the value, and wage hikes depending on the year as well. Allie, good deal for taxpayers, labor peace. What do you think of this?
Good deal for taxpayers, is it? We're going into
there's a question mark there. That was the question.
It's definitely not. I mean, what this is adding to is what I've been reading is a deal that is going to cost $1.5 billion in its first year. And so as I continue to research this, we saw in the ministry mandate letters, find efficiencies, find cuts, do whatever we can to reduce the deficit. And now this is going to just plug into that. So anything that we cut is now going to be paid by, or we're going to use up this money. And so it doesn't mean that it's a good deal for a lot of things in BC, because you're still getting those reduced services on the taxpayer cuts that we've taken to various ministries. Now we're paying the union, and so, or the employees rather. And I don't doubt that people are suffering with affordability, and that this is 100% what people need in order to pay the bills. But in the grand scheme of things, it was a failure on the BC NDP government in that it's going to mean tough decisions even more down the road.
Jeff, we spent several weeks hearing the Premier and the Finance Minister say that their offer, 2 years, around 3.5–4% general wage increase, was all BC could afford, all that was fair for taxpayers. Like, how do we square that with a 4-year, 12% deal, do you think?
This is the time of sports and the time of Blue Jays go. So let me use a bit of a sports analogy.
But okay, no,
I'm not distracted. Okay. Sports analogy. If you're getting a 4-year deal, locking in a 4-year deal at just above the rate of inflation with the major cost driver of government, I call that a tidy piece of work. And I think that's what the government has done here. It's welcome news. It's good to have those frontline workers back on the job and to have this settled. And I think that when you have a situation where both sides are claiming victory, you have the government claiming victory because the numbers are far below the last deal's wage increases, which were substantial. You have the union claiming victory because they bargained for more than was initially offered. I think that shows that there's a balance in the agreement, and in terms of the upwards trajectory of government spending that will need to be managed, 3% a year in line with inflation is not a bad place to be if you're government.
Mm-hmm. I guess so, although we don't have any plan on how to manage that, Jillian. Like, the cumulative cost of this thing by year 3 overwhelms the entire $4 billion contingency fund that presumably we're funding this out of, during a deficit of $12 billion every year. Does anyone care about that, or are we so far deep in the deficit that we're just like labor peace, whatever, deficits 15, 20,
I think it's cause for concern for a lot of people, but at the same time, I don't think there's any appetite for cuts. And the reality is there's a cost to not having these services provided effectively. And I think that's why the government, was ready to make a deal. You get projects held up because there's professional engineers as part of this deal. You have, social workers not getting trained. And we've seen time and time again, pick any issue in BC politics, you don't deal with issues in a proactive way. It costs way more down the road. So I think, well, yes, it's a big dollar figure. You kind of have to balance it against the cost of not having those things done effectively and not being able to fill those positions. And so I don't know if there's another way to resolve it.
And it's not over yet, because this becomes the floor for the BC nurses, the BC teachers, the remaining unions, presumably, that will want at least this plus extra pots of money on the side. So we'll see about the costs of that. I want to carve out some time. We're going to go to break here and carve out some time talking about the Cowichan Nation title decision, leading to fiery town halls and surprising statements from the NDP government. We will dive into that after the break.
120% of British Columbia is claimed by First Nations. This is going to be a case that's going to come to every community, that's going to come to everybody's private property, whether it is, in the next year or whether it's in the next decade or two. This will come. It needs to be resolved, and we need to be able to protect private property rights.
That's Opposition Leader John Rustad saying the fallout from the Cowichan Nation title decision will hit every community in BC in the coming years, Allie, as he seeks to take advantage of that issue following a fiery Richmond town hall where there were some nervous residents about their property ownership, some angry residents about not hearing anything about this from the 11 years it took to get to this court decision this summer. How do you think that real world kind of like town hall influenced the discussion of what has so far been a kind of legal case to this point?
At the core of what happened at the town hall in Richmond was the uncertainty of it all. So for the first time did private property owners and residents of Richmond realize that this was even an issue because of the lack of transparency across the board. So there is no one blame on the Cowichan tribes or the Richmond City Council or even the NDP government for that matter. But it's the uncertainty that's starting to scare people. What we even saw this week was someone put out a fake letter out of North Vancouver saying that this was going to happen here as well on city letterhead, and it was completely fake. And so you could see where there's like these fundamental issues where we could scare the entire province into thinking that this is going to come to their backyard. But what we want to do is make sure that we're talking about this case and this case alone right now before we start to scare the entire province in thinking this is going to happen, because that's not going to be helpful. One, for this issue, but the other for we have no idea where the end is going to happen, when the end is going to happen on this, because it's going to appeals. There is always that possibility that it goes into the Supreme Court of Canada, which is not going to be a tomorrow decision. And so it's that transparency piece that I think we are upset about. What's interesting about the Richmond Town Hall too was that it turned into a political battleground where we saw NDP cabinet ministers and MLAs as well as the opposition there. We saw city council hopefuls for Richmond there as well. And so I think as we continue to monitor this, we also have to look at the lens of why are people saying this in a municipal election year to boot.
Mm-hmm. There is that, although the mayor of Richmond isn't running again, but it is a live issue in Richmond. Jeff, what did you think of the concern from the public, kind of the real world concern about mortgages and businesses hitting this issue?
Yeah, no, that's rocket fuel for the opposition. You see the BC Conservatives and One BC both positioning this as an issue of reconciliation gone too far. And we saw a vote in the legislature this week. It was a first reading bill. It was voted down, but the Conservatives and One BC, this was a One BC piece of legislation calling for ripping up DRIPA, the Declaration of the Rights of Implementation Act, and UNDRIP. They call for it to be ripped up, which is a big change from what they voted on just 8 years ago. I think the government's doing the right things legally. It's asked for it's appealing and it's asked for a stay, which would prevent any changes happening until the appeal is heard. But they need they need more than a legal strategy now. They need a political one, because the fear is real, the sense of uncertainty is real. People are worried about mortgages. Businesses are wondering about financing from banks, and it's a big challenge for government. It's a hornet's nest. They need to be strong on this, or they risk losing an election on this issue, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Jillian, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it really reminds me of the Land Act that we were talking about last year, where it was super quiet and then it suddenly blew up. And it's such a shame because this is not where anybody wanted things to end up, including the Cowichan tribes, who did not want to come after private property rights. That was not part of their lawsuit. And by being forced into litigation instead of negotiation, the government has left themselves open to this ruling, and now they're dealing with all the uncertainty because they didn't do any proactive communication around it as well. I think the reality is that we don't have a lot of treaties in BC. This was probably a long time coming. This court case was in the courts for 10 years. I actually think John Rustad was minister when this case started. And that should have been long enough to come to a negotiated settlement that was reasonable, that didn't infringe on private property, like they've come up with over Haida Gwaii, that specifically has an agreement that protects private property rights. It's not easy, but pretending that it's too hard to even try is why we ended up in this situation in the first place.
Oh, that's a great point. And make sure you subscribe to the audio podcast of our show. We're going to have a more detailed discussion about this, because the BC government did advance some new sort of arguments in the public sphere about this week, kind of half advanced, half not advanced. And we'll talk a bit about that very complex issue that continues to reverberate through BC politics. But we'll leave it there for now. We're out of time. Thank you to the panel for being here, for explaining everything this week, and thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe for more, and we'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.